Welcome to the Japanese Politics 101 room with Timothy Langley, CEO of Langley Esquire, and me, your host, Maya Matsuoka. Saying that the last week has been eventful would be an understatement. As Japan and its Liberal Democratic Party prepare for the leadership elections, we have seen candidates express their willingness to run for the election and a day later withdraw their candidacy. And even though the week has been a roller coaster for many politicians, nothing seems to have been decided yet. Who will be the runners for the LDP leadership? Who has the strongest party support? Who will be the next Prime Minister of Japan? Timothy Langley is here to help us answer, if not all, at least some of these questions. So, Timothy, where shall we start?
Just kicking it off, for those of you who don't know, the Prime Minister announced his intention not to seek re-election for Prime Minister at the end of this month, and instead he will focus for the rest of his term on the COVID response. This came as a bit of a shock because in our room last week, we were talking about the small possibility that the Prime Minister could call for a snap election, which would push the election of the lower house before the election of the Prime Minister. And that has always been interpreted as to the Prime Minister's advantage. But everybody else in the party, the LDP leadership, wanted to keep it nice and clean, have the Prime Minister's election first, and then the election of the lower house 2 to 3 weeks after that. So what we saw since we last met, what we saw from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday was a lot of maneuvering by the Prime Minister, by Suga, to kind of figure out what his best play is and what his strategy is. And for a lot of people who follow Japanese politics, and I think a lot of people in this room, you know that the calculus of Japanese politics is different it's a different kind of logic. And how you get things done on Nagatacho, it's a different way of doing things than you might even be doing them in Kasumigaseki. So although there's no river that separates Kasumigaseki from Nagatacho, the distance between those two worlds is very large, and how you get things done and how you make decisions is vastly different. So even people who are watching politics very closely were taken off guard by Mr. Suga's announcement on Friday. So what I'd like to do is just talk about Mr. Suga right now, where he stands right now, and then talk about how we got where we are right now, and then talk about what it looks like from Monday going forward. And then I'd like to close up with what this means for the election of the lower house. So this week we will talk almost exclusively about the Prime Minister's race and a little bit about the lower house, but I think that'll take up most of our time, and I expect that there will be some good back and forth from the audience. So the election of the Prime Minister must be held on the 29th of this month. That's not very far away. Today is the 5th. It's the 29th. It's just right around the corner. And so that's why the jockeying for position occurred so heatedly this week. I actually predicted that it would be just a tiny bit later, out of respect and allowing for the Paralympics to kind of wrap up. They will wrap up this next week. So I'm close. It's no cigar, but I'm pretty close. But the reason why Mr. Suga, whose popularity now stands really low, it's depending on the poll, it could be 30%, 32%. I expect it's more like 20, 25%, but people just don't want to say that. So he's reading the leaves, and I think it's not inaccurate to say that he was pushed out, depending on the forces. Well, actually, the people that you talk to, everybody's going to have a different opinion, and in a lot of these things, it's just a lot of it is based on speculation, even those that are following this closely. But it is accurate to say that the Prime Minister met with Mr. Nikai on Thursday night. Only a 10-minute meeting, so it was 10 minutes. He traveled from the Prime Minister's office and went to the LDP headquarters. Although he's the president of the LDP and Mr. Nikai is the Secretary General, he went to the LDP. That's not too unusual. Mr. Abe did the same thing when he decided to resign. So it's kind of the required pecking order on these kinds of topics. So reportedly, the Prime Minister went to Mr. Nikai on Thursday just to tell him that he intended to run for re-election. Nobody has to actually commit until the 17th of this month. The election campaign starts on the 17th and it finishes on the 29th. There will be a vote on the 29th, and then the new Prime Minister will be um, what would you say? He's not elected, but he takes over the office of Prime Minister on the 30th. So the news was that he had told Mr. Nikai that, but I think probably there either was a different discussion or that was the discussion. He just went in and told Mr. Nikai, I'm going to run, and I want to let you know that so that you have advance notice. And tomorrow morning, we're going to have the meeting of the executive committee. So I've made my decision, and I'll see you tomorrow morning. And given that, and given the fact that earlier in the week, the Prime Minister had already announced and gotten the acquiescence of the Secretary General that he would be changing the Secretary General, the position of the Secretary General. So, Mr. Nikai, I appreciate all that you've done for the last 5 years, and your resignation will be accepted, and I'll put somebody else in that position. That was a Wednesday, Thursday kind of conversation. So there might be a little bit of bitterness, a little bit of you think you're going to be calling the shots. Well, I'm going to show you, that kind of thing going on in the background. When the Prime Minister said on Friday morning at the executive committee that he wasn't going to run, he didn't announce. He went back to the Prime Minister's office. It was the Secretary General who announced to the press that the Prime Minister is not going to resign. And then the Prime Minister, around noon, he had a very brief press conference, 2 minutes, where he said that too. So he reiterated what the Secretary General said. So just knowing that, you can tell that, who is driving the bus, who's making the shots, what are the pressures that are being brought to bear on Mr. Suga's decision. It does indicate a little bit of the backroom politics going on there. So let's just talk a little bit about what happened this last week. What was the progeny of things that happened? And maybe since these trial balloons were tried and failed, it might mean that the reason why they were tried in the first place was because they had good validity. So that means this next week that parts of those trial balloons will still survive. It could also mean that they were just politically suggested for the sole purpose of protecting the Prime Minister's position, and it created too much ire, and you won't see that again. So let's just talk a little bit about that because we might be seeing that coming up. Initially, the Prime Minister wanted to change the leadership of the LDP. There are 4 top positions there, including the Secretary General. And he received acquiescence to do that. And then he took it a step further and he said, and I'd like to change a couple of ministerial posts at the same time, which he also received a lukewarm acquiescence within the LDP to do. And clearly that meant he wanted to change his chief cabinet spokesman because they've never seen eye to eye. And that tension kind of suggests to the voting team and the voting population and the people who are going to be running for lower house election, that there's not a consistent, cohesive leadership. And I think that's probably pretty accurate. Even though he received that acquiescence, he had to backpedal on it because the people who he wanted to change are people who have and wield enormous power already. The four top leaders of the LDP includes Mr. Shimomura, who is maybe number 3 in the Hosoda faction. He went in and talked with the prime minister on Monday, a day after our last meeting, and said, I'm not going to be challenging you. I'm going to focus on taking care of COVID. I'm not going to be a candidate. You're my man. He didn't have to do that. He went in because the calculus at that particular point in time was, it looks like Abe and Aso are going to weigh in for Mr. Suga. It looks that way on Monday. And Shimomura being in the Hosoda faction, which is basically going to be the Abe faction once he clears up this kerfuffle he has with the public prosecutor's office on the Sakuro Mirukai financing. He doesn't make a decision without Mr. Abe's acknowledgement and direction. The same thing is true with Mr. Kono. You'll remember we talked a lot about Mr. Kono maybe 5-6 weeks ago. His approval rating, the appreciation of him among the general population was sitting at around 20-23%, pretty high and higher than anybody else that was in potential consideration as prime minister. He said that he would publish his manifesto the day after the LDP decided what the election process is going to look like for LDP president. And he did publish a book. It wasn't quite a manifesto. He called it his manifesto. It was his vision of Japan. He did publish it the day afterwards, but it didn't have the fanfare and it didn't have the energy, the press release, and everything that you might expect given the signals that he was sending before that. So something happened with Kono. And similarly with Mr. Shimomura, he's not going to do anything without Mr. Aso, who is the head of the faction, telling him, giving him direction and that sort of thing. So apparently what we have over the last week was Mr. Suga was in something of a good position. Mr. Kishida announced on Monday, actually, that yes, I'm going to be a candidate for prime minister. And when I become prime minister, here are my 4 pillars. I'm going to talk about this. And these are going to be the pillars. It's like he was, I don't know, he pulled together a team of people who told him, this is what will get you elected. And he formed a platform on that. He hasn't announced a manifesto or anything of that nature. It's just kind of like it's like he threw it together. It came off a little bit like that. But in his presentation, in his press release, it was on TV and that sort of thing. He also took a swipe at the leadership, the LDP leadership, and at Mr. Nikai in particular, and said, when I become prime minister, I'm going to have term limits for these kind of old farts who are pulling the reins and allowing or not allowing Japanese politics to move vibrantly forward. And that's what I'll do. And under my leadership, it will move vibrantly forward because although the prime minister could serve for 4 years, the leadership of the LDP needs to rotate every year. So that would give him, the prime minister, more standing power. That really, I guess, scared Suga. So he came in the next day and began to talk about, this is on Tuesday, about a snap election. Maybe it's better for the country for us to have an election of the lower house and then push off the election of the prime minister. Don't you guys think that's a great idea? You see how he's trying to maneuver so that he doesn't have to go up for election first, that maybe by some stroke of the gods of fate, the LDP doesn't lose so many people, and as a consequence, the current prime minister is attributed the power of having pulled that together, and then he succeeds himself in becoming prime minister. It would also diminish, presumably, the number of contenders. That lasted a day, and he pulled off on that. The LDP bigwig said, "This is not going to work." It lasted a day. So the turmoil that you can see happening over the last 5 days, in retrospect, I mean, while we were in it, nobody thought that Mr. Hosoda would not run. So in retrospect, now that we're standing today, you can see those key features that in 5 days, things just tumbled one after the other. It looks like he began to lose his support from Abe Kono, certainly from Nikai, who was the fellow who was responsible for putting him in the position in the first place. So that's kind of how, it's an encapsulated version of how we got to where we are on Friday. So Saturday and Sunday, not a lot happens in the press. So Monday will be very active, but before everybody closed up for business, it was announced, or Mr. Abe announced, that he was putting his weight behind one of the candidates, which was something of an unexpected movement. In order to be successful for selecting the prime minister, it is best that Mr. Aso and Mr. Abe voice their endorsement of a single candidate together. And Mr. Abe going off the rails and endorsing Takaichi sensei as his candidate begins to suggest that not all is well between Abe and Aso. We also had, before the weekend started, Mr. Konotaro going on television and saying, I'm very much considering running. I will be talking with my faction and my faction leaders, my friends, and my boss about what's the best way forward. He didn't actually throw his head into the ring. The only person that's actually physically thrown their head into the ring is Mr. Kishida, who has his own faction, who can muster the 20 votes. In order to become a candidate for the LDP president, you have to have 20 members of the LDP endorse you. One of the suggestions of why Mr. Suga decided he was going to refrain from running was because he didn't think he could get the 20 votes. I find that hard to believe. He's prime minister, and it would be really outrageous if, as sitting prime minister, he couldn't get 20 endorsements. You might also, I don't know if, I mean, maybe it's just me, maybe I follow it so closely, but you might have noticed that Koizumi Shinjiro was visiting the prime minister every day last week. And the first time it didn't take too much news, but the second day it began to raise eyebrows. The third day, the fourth day, the fifth day. And he was on TV last night. He shed a tear, actually, talking about what a great prime minister Mr. Suga is, and it's regrettable that he's not going to be running. The speculation was that he was going to, as remarkable as it sounds, promote Koizumi as a replacement for Nikai. Nikai is going to move out. I'm going to reshuffle the cabinet a little bit. I'm going to get 4 new people in there. And the leadership of the LDP, I've got to put new people in there. And Koizumi, I want you to take a leadership role. Koizumi's 41 years old. He would be the youngest Secretary General, younger than even Tanaka, when he assumed that role. So that would be a remarkable thing to happen. And maybe the reason why Koizumi was shedding a tear on Friday was because all of the conversations he was having with Mr. Suga were just completely dashed, and maybe Maybe there's not even a cabinet portfolio available to him when the dust settles. So with that, I'd just like to talk about where we stand right now. But it's like, I don't know what it's like. It's like even though we're going to talk about where we are right now, tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, it'll all change, and a lot more will come to light. You might have people, even though it'll be the 6th, you might have people who come up with their candidacy, or maybe even announce they're going to publish their own manifesto. It will be, I think one of the things that they were attempting to avoid was it being a shit show and a fight among various factions, and creating the animosity that always comes when you have 3 or 4 or 5 candidates. They were trying to avoid that. It looks like that's maybe what we're going to confront. And what that suggests is when you have a show like that, the strength of the prime minister who eventually runs is not very strong, and the possibility of there being a change in the administration within a year or 2 years is very high, because you've got a lot of people who are distracting you, that are, leaking information to the press, that are damaging or diminishing you, even though they're in the same party, because it's a fight for primacy within the LDP. So as it stands right now, we've got 4 potential candidates that look pretty solid. Mr. Ishiba will probably run. He was pushed off to the side last week to hopefully not run, because Mr. Suga might put him within an LDP position, which would keep him out of the LDP president's race. We have Takaishi, who just received the endorsement of Mr. Abe, as I mentioned earlier. You've got Kishida, who has thrown in his hat. You've got Seiko Noda, who is within the LDP, very strongly endorsed by Mr. Nikai. You've got Konotaro. I don't think you have Koizumi as a potential candidate, although he does score high in public approval. More likely, he would get an LDP position, and it might be Konotaro even getting an LDP position rather than a candidacy for the LDP, to whittle down the number of candidates. It's all rather foggy right now. We will see the outcome of this Monday and Tuesday. So Monday there will be a press release coming out of the LDP. So stay tuned for that. But there will be lots of rock and roll between our briefing today and our briefing next Sunday. So please stay tuned to that. Just to wrap up this part, because I've been going on for almost a half an hour. The election of the prime minister will occur on the 29th of this month. That's pretty much set in stone. All of the vectors are pointing to that. There will be candidates who throw their hat in, but by the 17th, everybody must declare. And then the election campaign starts on the 17th, and the election will be on the 29th. The new prime minister will step into the position on the 30th. Then there's going to be an election for the lower house. So it's not going to happen immediately. The lower house constitutionally their term ends, on the 28th, on the 17th of October. There is a provision that if the Diet meets and the House is closed, the House has no confidence, or it's closed by the Prime Minister, then the election of the lower house must occur within 40 days. So it pushes out the date of having that election an additional period of time. But more likely, the Prime Minister will be sworn in. He will reshuffle the cabinet. He won't open the House. He'll keep the House closed, and the cabinet will decide, let's close the House and have an election. And then the time frame is a little bit shorter. So there are two scenarios for the election of the lower house. One is a little bit shorter. It'll probably be around the 17th of October, and the longer term one is probably around the 28th. That's the last possible time that the lower house could have their election. Otherwise, it's unconstitutional, and it's unlikely that would happen. So those two scenarios. I think there are a lot of other things that we can talk about. For example, how the prime minister is elected. If you're interested in getting into that kind of nitty gritty, it's an internal matter within the LDP. There are 766 votes that are cast for prime minister. So let's say there are four candidates. It's likely to be four. There could be five. The 766 votes that elect the prime minister by majority vote are distributed. Half of those are distributed to LDP members. I'm sorry, LDP parliamentarians, people who are members of the parliament, and the other half are members of the LDP at large. These are business people, academics, people who have been in the LDP for a long time. And those are the votes that are counted. It's a bit of a detail. I don't know if it interests many people, but it could become an important feature like hanging chads. I doubt there's going to be that kind of an argument here in Japan, but that's what you can anticipate coming down the path. So with that, I'd just like to open the floor. I know, Ren, you've been participating in a couple of rooms as well. Maybe you have some new insight that you can share with us. But otherwise, let's kick this off and open the room for questions, for maybe insight that others might share with us.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm inviting Ren and also Hayato. Ren.
Good morning.
Good morning, Hayato. Thank you for joining us here.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning,
Yeah.
Ren. Thank you for the heads up on the room that you were in yesterday. I'm sorry I couldn't participate.
No.
I was
Yeah,
tied up.
it was. I should have invited you earlier. It was one of the congressman who was speaking about how he felt about this whole things. I think he was speaking from his mind. So I thought maybe Timothy wanted to hear what he has to say. But the summary, a quick summary of what he was saying was that many of, if you believe him, many of the people felt that this election should be postponed. If the Olympics could be postponed for a year, then this Jiminto, how do you call that in English? LDP? Is that how we call it?
Yeah.
Right, the Liberal
Yeah.
Democratic Party.
Right. Yeah.
Which is neither liberal nor democratic,
right.
But anyway.
Okay. This is a private event. This is not a national event. After all, that's what he said. So why can we postpone a year because everyone is still suffering from the COVID? And this is just so irresponsible. And I'm sure you may have had a lot of things to say, so I invited you. But I thought that was just another angle of looking at this problem that many people thought that the election shouldn't even have to happen. So that's my input for you.
Thank you. Yes, it's true that the election of the LDP president is an LDP matter. But I also think that pulling that kind of a tactic, what would that achieve? That would achieve maybe Suga staying in office a little bit longer. But I don't think anybody wants that. I think even the rank and file, one of the things that Koizumi was asked to advise the prime minister on is what's my standing? What's my possibility? You kind of represent the younger members of the parliament, Shinjiro. What do you think? What's your advice? And I think the younger Koizumi told him that your numbers are down. They're down significantly more than what is being reported in the press. And I think the younger members are reluctant to run under the LDP banner because these are the younger guys. They don't have the stamina. They don't have all of the election money that they need to run an effective campaign. They've been in office maybe once or twice, and so they have contenders that are fighting against them. Running under the flag of Mr. Suga is probably not to their advantage. And also the idea of Mr. Suga to shuffle some of the LDP positions and also some of the ministerial portfolios. If you think about that, and for example, your Koizumi and Mr. Suga is saying, why don't you come and join my cabinet and help bolster my image? Potentially, that cabinet post is only going to last 1 month because assuming you say, yes, Mr. Suga, I'm going to do that. Thank you very much. Monday or Tuesday, the cabinet is shuffled. You become a new minister or you become a party elder within the LDP. Then you have the election of the lower house. Everything starts from scratch. So your tenure as a minister or as an LDP, that could last only 30 days. And you can imagine that that's going to be hotly contested. It might help you in your election, but depending on how poorly the LDP does. And the LDP is predicted to do poorly in this election. How poorly will dictate, who's going to be the next prime minister. So thanks, Ren.
Thank you. Hayato, good morning again.
Oh, hi, how are you? Okay, good morning. So, that I'd like to kind of remind you that on the 8th, like 5 weeks ago, I mentioned to you that Takaichi was going to be the candidate for this election, right? So that was 8th of August, right? And basically, there's a big machine behind her to get her elected, right? So for that, at this time, her chance of winning is 50 to 60%, right? And she's doing the same thing that Abe did before, which was to publish the book, on a manifesto that's going to come out tomorrow, right? And written by the same author, probably, who wrote the book for the Abe, right? Yeah, so for that, and also the money's behind all this, K-Darren already had this money, funded for the campaign. It has even have a, Abe, the group department within the K-Darren to exclusively fund the Abe. So he's always a leader. But this time, he didn't really wanted to kind of come back too quickly because he is supposed to be, have a, GBO, right? He has a Crohn's disease. So he kind of resigned last year. So he didn't want to look like a too light by just coming back to say, oh, I got better, so I'm back again, right? But anyway, so that's kind of I heard in art, and the machine is going to probably kick in, and she probably she got the support of Abe, and a good chance that she'll get the support of Aso, right? So the Konotaro, which I personally like very much for him to win, and I believe that he has a capability and deserve the chance to become prime minister. But at this election, he had to wait a little bit longer, So I feel bad about it. But so until the Mr. Aso decided to retire and make the Konotaro the head of the faction, this same drama, I believe, is going to probably continue because Aso didn't want to kind of give up, his seniority or position, to so the because once he kind of gave up the position to the Konotaro, and it's like he loses all the power that he has right now at this time. So that's for that. So the Suga, like what I heard, but I'm sure you heard the same thing. Was this Suga kind of lost the power when this he kind of tried to get this Koizumi or Konotaro to support him to overthrow Abe and Aso and Nikai who are all like seniors, right? So those guys are senior in power, and those kind of, but like but Suga didn't, because if the Koizumi support the Suga, right, and become the Secretary General, right, and he's going to end up being like Ozawa Ichiro if they loses, right? Yes, he will never have the opportunity to be in a leadership role again.
He'll be
So
an
that's what.
outcast. Yes.
Yeah, he'll be outcast for the life, and he'll never get any chance to become the, he'll not be the minister much, right? And he'll never, because he's still young, right? And he has a very long like a time ahead, the way to become the leader, and he'll become the leader eventually. I'm pretty sure, right? Yeah. So, but he so for that, like he did not really want to be the Ozawa Ichiro, and also the Konotaro, so the Mr. Aso. I guess I heard like I told Suga that Suga is dead, right? So we're not going to go down with you. Yeah. So for that, the ASO would never allow the Konotaro to support the Suga. So for that, yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that's a moment that kind of Suga decided that his time is done, right? Yeah. So for that, like he just announced, he kind of and also like but we have so the Takaichi has a 50-60 chance, and another candidate that may have potential is Kishida, because he's very capable. He has a support of younger members, right? Then again, he may end up being like pretty much like Suga again, right? Because all these senior people like Abe, Aso, all these guys will never support him, because they kind of feel that like if they support the Kishida and if he loses, then they'll go down with Kishida, right? Which they don't really want to do. They don't really have to do, right? So for that, Kishida will end up in the same position like Suga has been, which is he will have to kind of jungle and maneuver the power to try to stay up, but he won't have any backing. And also, like I kind of heard was Nikai maybe just supporting, just Ishiba for this coming election. Yeah, because they kind of know that Ishiba is going to lose anyway. But then again, we have those minority who have who do not agree with the majority, right? Yeah, so they it's kind of giving a Kishiba to keep playing is a very safe, for him to just keep, banging, because he will never win, right? Then we don't have to worry about, somebody else who's going to come up, as long as the Ishiba is there. So that's what I heard, right? So let's look forward to the Takaishi's book tomorrow that's coming out.
Thank you, Hayato. So I hope, the bantering of these names doesn't confuse people. I've said it so many times before. Japanese politics it's a little bit thick getting into, but once you're past a couple of levels, the names don't change that much. So it's always a good value to invest in knowing who the main players are. We weren't talking about Takaichi until, Hayato, you mentioned it about 3 weeks ago. We didn't spend too much time on it because there was not a lot of power behind it.
5
But
weeks ago,
now,
I mentioned 5 weeks ago.
5 weeks ago. So, yes, your predictive powers are impressive. So learning who these people are, these players, it's a good investment because they hardly ever go away. They just stay around and they eventually reemerge. And then there are a lot of people who are just solid faction members. They're solid diet members, and they stay in the background. You never hear much about them, but they're good, solid players, which is amazing because, for example, Takeichi and Noda Seiko, they're members without a political faction. They're kind of independents, yet they're getting the endorsement of Abe or Aso or somebody like that, Nikai or Kishida even. So it's the value of being an independent at a time like this is really higher than those people who have been, slogging away and dedicating their time to the individual factions, biding their time and hoping for a cabinet portfolio or maybe an LDP party position. So Japanese politics is really intriguing. It's interesting. There is a logic to it, but you just got to, kind of stay on top of it. Takaichi is, so there, a lot of things that you don't know about these individual candidates will be revealed to you once they begin to say, I think I would be a good leader. So a lot of the, maybe that's the reason why they've been quiet in the background. Noda Sensei and also Takaichi, they have ghosts in the closet that people don't talk much about, but they will be talked about a lot more now that they have their candidacy coming up. And it's a tough fight. It's a physical contact sport. So I don't want to go into that too much, but I think, yes, I agree that Kishida has a high profile and a high likelihood. I think Konotaro has a high likelihood as well, although he hasn't formally announced his candidacy. I expect that'll happen this week. Probably, yeah. These are the individuals who will probably run.
Timothy, can I ask a few questions or comment?
Sure, please do, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks very much to both you and Maya for this room. It's great, and to hear the views of Ren and Hayato and all the other members. So my first comment is, I wonder if you could shed some light in terms of the gap. We hear that, Konotaro and Ishiba Shigeru are actually overwhelmingly popular in terms of potential candidates for premiership. But when we think about the facts within the party, of course, they're not up there in the same degree as some of the other candidates. I'm wondering if you can explain that gap. And second, I'm interested in you shedding some light on this in particular. I find the choice of Takaichi-san and being supported by former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is really curious. And I'm wondering, what is the viability, and this may be inappropriate, but bringing a woman into leadership when, likely the whole cabinet's going to be men or will be dominated by men. Is this a gamble to inculcate more diversity into Japanese politics to bring on board women voters and those that are interested in diversity? Because in my mind, and I think of the former foreign minister, Tanaka Makiko, one of the reasons why she was not successful is because she wasn't one of the boys. She wasn't able to play with the boys very well. And as we all know, Japanese society and Japanese politics and Japanese corporate rooms are dominated by men and dominated by the politics that men practice. So I'm just wondering, what is the wisdom of bringing on Takaichi when she probably won't be a very effective governor, considering how men dominate politics in Japanese society? I'll stop there. Thanks again for everything.
Thanks. Those are great questions. Let me, since you directed the question to me, let me give you my 2 cents. But also, I'm sure other people have great value to invest in that kind of a discussion. So let me just try and hit it real hard and short. The distinction between Ishiba and Kono. So Ishiba has a certain affinity and likability among the younger members, because he's worked on that. He was defense minister, and then he kind of ran into a little bit of political trouble. He fell off of the wagon with Mr. Abe. They got into some arguments. So in anticipating his time to try for the prime ministership, he focused on the younger members. So he did this in a concerted effort to develop that robust affinity. The problem with him is that he is the smartest guy in the world, if you've ever talked to him. So although on TV he looks really thoughtful, he speaks slowly, very distinctly, he is one tough son of a bitch. And he doesn't take fools easily. And accordingly to him, everybody else is a fool. So he's really sharp-minded and pretty aggressive on that front. But he does have a following. With Konotaro, he is young, so that affinity is already established. He wants to develop that profile. He in fact presents himself as a representation of the younger members. And so I think that's the affinity with him. But he's disliked among the LDP elite because it doesn't make that much sense to me. He's a bit outspoken. He is uh, visually against nuclear power. He's got very strong opinions. Um, but it seems to me that his pedigree is enough to overcome that. Even though he's a bit outspoken, he's a bit more leaning towards the United States perception of how geopolitics works, and so I think he's favored by the Japan hands and by the English speaking community, and not so much among the elders. So in that, I think both Ishiba and Kono share that distinction. So it is a bit of a toss-up. The popularity kind of goes with Kono, with Ishiba coming in maybe in third place. With regard to the women's issue, gosh, that's so deep and that's so rich. So you might remember that a week ago we were talking about, and people love to talk about Koike, the governor of
Yeah.
Tokyo, her coming in and going for election and then becoming prime minister. What's that kind of like? It just logistically it doesn't work. They're going to have the vote for the prime minister first. She's not even going to be in the diet at that point. Then they're going to have the election of the lower house, and if she runs, she will win. But they've already selected who the prime minister is going to be, so it would have to be an election after that. She was very close to Nikai. Nikai was going to endorse and support her. As of Monday, he's out, so that potential endorsement does not exist, except depending on where else he ends. He's not going to disappear. He's not going to be kicked out of an LDP position. He'll probably be elevated so that he saves face, but it's still a different position as the Secretary General, and identifying who as the candidates goes to different election districts and how much money he's going to give them as Secretary General. But I think the women's issue, yeah, we've had a little bit of ups and downs there, and you keep wishing the Japanese could do a better job at it. But like you said, it's the logistics, it's the history, it's the culture of the place. But with this new election that's coming up, they need something dynamic. They need to shake something up. So let's do it this way or that way. And I think the women's issue is one way to kind of shake it up, make it a little bit more exciting. I think Mr. Suga's idea of shaking it up and getting out a couple of these, get Nikai out. If I get Nikai out, then I've got Aso, I've got Abe. They're going to be in my camp. I've taken care of them. I've put somebody else in, maybe Koizumi, maybe Konotaro, somebody else, and then I've shuffled the cabinet. So I've already paid my debts. I've already rewarded the people who have decided to support me, and now let's go into the election of the lower house. So something dynamic needs to happen. I think you'll see that coming up in the next week or so. I don't want to go on too much about it, but other people have input on this issue.
Timothy, I just was really interested in what you said about Ishiba and Konotaro, and I want to just add to that, just based on my experiences in both China and Korea, and this is prior to Prime Minister Suga being elected. Many high officials actually in both China and Korea were asking me who's going to be the next potential prime minister, and I gave a list, right? And one of the lists was Konotaro. And I was really surprised how much emotion
Resistance
and anger I received on the Korean side and the China side in terms of Konotaro. And I was surprised by that, in particular from Korea. On the Chinese side, not so much. And I think that when Konotaro was foreign minister, there's this really interesting anecdotal experience that he met his counterpart Wang Yi, and Wang Yi said, "You're nothing like your father." Konotaro, the former prime minister that signed gave an official apology to China and other countries for Japan's imperial behavior, and Konotaro responded in saying, "You're not the China my father knew." And I think this really hit the Chinese hard in that they viewed Kono Taro as really a hawk on China. And again, as you mentioned, in line with, I think, the broader U.S. and many countries' views about the direction of China. Ishibe, on the other hand, was really seen in I guess, a bureaucratically competent person, but in terms of the direction of foreign relations in the region, a bit unsure from foreign counterparts. And again, on the woman issue, it's really, how do we bring in women into the party and into the leadership, into the Kante, when there's not that many at the grassroots? And this goes back to something you could probably shed some more light on. Where are the women in the party, and why aren't we be able to cultivate women leaders in the LDP and other parties?
Wow, that's a deep, deep subject. I mean, even if you look at the press corps, you see more women now in the background asking questions, holding the microphones. But what a tough job that is. I mean, staying out, drinking with the guys, chasing the members of the cabinet, and having drinks with them late at night. What an arduous job that is. And I think the guys just crank it up to be even more difficult because the women just can't keep up. I sense that, but yeah, it's so deep and it's so woven into the fabric. Yeah, you have to be one tough cookie to toe the line with the males who have been trained to compete and fight with each other at that level.
Yeah, it's a real challenge in terms of thinking about next generation leadership and more inclusive leadership, and creating a leadership that actually addresses broader societal issues. And the LDP doesn't have it, right? And it doesn't seem to be able to cultivate it from the grassroots up. I think that really, if we look at it from that point of view, a lot of the challenges in Japan that I think politicians haven't been able to address really are related to that lack of diversity in the leadership, and it looks like it's going to continue.
Well, as a political ploy, though, it kind of strikes me as a good idea. We're going to have this this individual. She's female. She's going to be our candidate for prime minister. It does, part of what they're worried about is that when they have the election, not everybody shows up, right? That they're not so enthusiastic about, who is in the leadership. They don't believe in the LDP anymore. You've been going this way and that way, and COVID is a disaster. You've got three people who have various components of, dictating what our COVID response is going to be. You get your goddamn act together. So it could be one of the sparks that ignites that kind of enthusiasm. But the problem is that, like, when the LDP fell out and the opposition party came in, they did so disastrously that we'll probably never go back that way. And that could be, what happens, with a female candidate for prime minister or even one of the cabinet posts. It's
Absolutely.
you shake your head and wish it was different, but it's what a tough environment.
It sure is, and the former Prime Minister Obuchi Kenzo's daughter, Obuchi, who's seen as a competent politician. She did go into a scandal, was seen as a potential prime minister candidate, a few years ago.
Disappeared.
She's disappeared. Looks like she's moving back to center. She's come back from the political desert, but she's seen as a much more competent, I think, politician and mover and shaker than I think the current candidates for prime minister could be.
Well, they always say, it's kind of like the mantra. We stick with the current guy because there's nobody else in the wings that even looks good. And that's not accurate. There are a lot of people who are really, really good, who have gone through the battles, who have, suffered the indignation of defeat, but have come back. There are a lot of people like that. A lot of the candidates that we have now, Ishiba he's great, actually. He's really intelligent. He would make a great prime minister. I don't know about Kishida, but still, he's got high approval ratings. A lot of people like him. I imagine he would do, a passable job. Um, yeah, there are some Konotaro. He doesn't have that kind of experience at the upper level, but I think as a new face, and I think he would be a dynamic uh, prime minister. I don't know if he would last the whole term. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
it is, once again, it is rock and roll. This next week will be really dynamic, and a lot of excitement and a lot of new things coming out. And it could be that although Takaichi um, has announced that, well, actually, Abe has announced that he will support her, it still doesn't mean that she has 20 votes. Also, it bears mentioning that this is a secret ballot for prime minister. So although Abe might be in charge of the 96 votes of Seiwakai, the Hosoda faction, and they have their breakfast briefing. He says, "Guys, this is what we're going to do today. The vote comes out. I want you to vote like this." It's a secret ballot, so although you could say, "Yes, sir, we're going for it," but you vote for Ishiba because you've had a conversation with him, and there's a little bit of you know conversation. Um, the boss is never going to know that that's how you voted. So I think the membership at large is eager for a change too, something dramatic, so that when they go for election, when they've lost their seat because the term ends and they have to go to their election district again, they have somewhat of an advantage because they were the the Diet member representing that district, but they've also got some contenders. And the opposition party, Edano, is on fire. The opposition claiming all of the negative things about the current administration. It's going to be a fistfight, and there are going to be some, significant challenges, especially for the younger members who are, you know, a large portion of the parliament is populated by these Abe children who have never really gotten into a fist fight yet. So
well, may I ask a question? So we're talking about different personalities and the candidates for the next premiership in Japan. But at the same time, and of course, Stephen mentioned movers and shakers, and well, who will be, the next leader, of course. But I really wonder whether the leader, well, the next prime minister actually can really have that big an influence on the policies of the LDP in terms of national policies, and public affairs and so on, because we all know that, well, the prime minister is a face, of course, and we need a strong leader. But at the same time, as we have seen with Mr. Suga, he tried to implement some, or to try new decisions. And he very, very soon after that actually had to go back on those decisions because the party did not approve of them. So I wonder how big an influence, the new leader will have on the policies of the party and the policies of the country as well.
that's a great question, and I get asked that question a lot by a lot of people, corporate clients, and in briefings. What is it going to mean? How is the change of leadership going to alter, for example, our investments in Japan are long term, over the next 5 years. This is what we're going to do because our understanding is that Japanese policy on this particular issue, let's say semiconductors or renewable energy, a couple of these hot topics, will that potentially change if Mr. Suga is not prime minister anymore? And the answer there is, as you've indicated, kind of no. The Whoever is the next prime minister, it's still going to be an LDP person. So with the LDP basically in power and dictating policy to some degree, and then the ministries motoring those decisions and also kind of doing what the hell they want in spite of what the parliamentarians tell them, there's a lag time. So yeah, moving policy is a very difficult thing, and sometimes even though a leader, maybe an LDP leader or a political leader, such as a prime minister or as a minister of state, wants to do something different or more dynamic, he still has the weight of guiding the ministry to do his bidding. And there not only is there a lag time, but also as a new minister, a portfolio in an individual ministry, a lot of the guys there who are dealing with the minister's office or the executive team, they just kind of look at each other and say, flavor of the month. So just keep him happy, brief him, make sure he doesn't get into any trouble, pick him up and put him to bed, and make sure he doesn't make any mistakes. Part of that's part of the job. The other part is he wants to do something a little bit different. He has to move that machinery too. So the policy making is difficult. It's fraught with a lot of different challenges, and it's not likely to change overnight. Like you indicated, though, it's not really a figurehead. It's kind of like the president of the United States. How much can he actually do? But he can create this aura and this energy and this vision. Not something that comes quickly to mind when you talk about Japanese leaders. Even though the politicians sometimes they speak very eloquently about what the vision is and what we should be doing. Once they become in the leadership, they tone things down quite a bit. So it moves very, very slowly. But yeah, a new face and a new team and a new vision, I think would help the LDP a lot and maybe help them not lose as many seats as they're predicted to lose within the next 8 weeks.
Yes,
I would agree with that, Timothy. I think, we take for granted that the former prime minister was in power for actually 8 years. And it was an anomaly. If you look back, and I sometimes, I tell my friends that, I've seen, I think, 17 or 18 prime ministers since I came into Japan. And
Right.
It's absolutely incredible. So a 1 year rotating ship of prime ministership means that
That's the norm.
that's the norm. That means that policy might be, you can't even plan the policy because you haven't done the research, let alone execute it. And the former prime minister, however you judge him, had almost 8 years to put together a policy package and execute it over a period of time. And some things were, quite significant. I think corporate governance was one of the things that he did well. There was some modest deregulation. Of course, foreign policy, I think, was an outlier in terms of success. Bringing back Japan-China relations to a kind of a steady state maybe is another success. But that longevity provided former prime minister to some ability to really pursue policies over the long term. And Mr. Suga hasn't been able to do that. That being said, if the next prime minister is lucky, he could inherit another, critical juncture, as we call them, like Corona, which really has forced businesses and the Japanese government to rethink, how dependent they are on silly technologies like faxes and signatures, and to increase more productivity within the state by, digifying the bureaucracy. And you spoke about this last week, Timothy, in terms of the Agency for Digitization. This is something that I think the LDP will continue to pursue, whoever's prime minister. But ultimately, I guess the question is how easy it is to shift almost a $5 trillion economy significantly in a year or two. And I don't think it's reasonable for us to expect huge changes under a new prime minister because of just the size and the complexity of the Japanese economy. All you can do is just tweak it at the periphery, unless there's some kind of outside force or, the old Beiatsu or Gaiatsu that causes Japan to change. And the Beiatsu, Gaiatsu caused Japan to join the Comprehensive, Progressive, and Trans-Pacific Partnership, eventually leading it. So there's a lot of factors, domestic factors, regional factors, and of course the black swans like Corona.
Well, not only that, but also as a new prime minister, you're also fighting the internal battle of, maintaining your status quo and making sure your ministers don't get caught in scandals and spending money or receiving money or going to a love hotel and being photographed by Bunshun. I think most of their energy, especially in the first year, is just establishing their primacy and their stability. And I think, like Mr. Suga said, I can run for election as prime minister, or I can devote my time to COVID. I can't do both of those. So, I mean, this is the public story that he said on Friday. So I've decided I'm going to focus on COVID, and I'm not going to go for election. And I think part of that is true. Running for election, it's a long election cycle. It's 12 days, and it would be contentious. So I think, your time is spent just, trying to ensure your own survivability, and policy and dealing with the ministries. That's really far down your priority list.
Absolutely.
Can I jump in for a minute?
Please do.
Okay, so Mr. Abe gave the opportunity to Mr. Takaichi for this, prime ministership, election. So for that, he gave her the opportunity. He can take it away, right away, So for that, as you know, Mr. Takaichi is not who she is, but he's like she's considered to be what is the like bunshin means it's like a mini Abe, like a mini me of Abe, as well the
Right.
disciple, right? Yeah, so for that, and she has what she's going to get, what she, what she becomes, as long as she becomes the mini me. But once she decided, try to do her own move, like Suga did,
She could
she'll
pull
be
a
gone.
Suga. Yes.
Right, she'll be gone right away, right? Yeah, because so for that she had to kind of maneuver to keep the Abe, also and the senior people happy. Otherwise, she's not going to survive. That's one point, right? So 2 days ago, Mr. Abe was kind of contemplating whether he's going to push the Mr. Motegi, right, or Takaichi, and he decided to push the Mr. Takai, right, but Takaichi. But then he can go back and say, oh, that Takaichi is out, right? So now Motegi is my front man, right? So he can do that today. He can just turn around and say, oh, hey, you know what,
Yeah. A
so
trial balloon.
yeah. So it's like a Japan society, right? Unfortunately, and I don't want to be negative here, but many ladies, women, sometimes like they establish who they are based on their track record, their own power, right? But many times they are like more like being fronted or supported by powerful men, like in the case of Takaichi and Abe and Aso, right? Yeah. So for that, and Takaichi's it's not so much of her, she, entered the popularity of, say, Koizumi or this, right? Or she didn't have a track record, say, like, the Koike, right? Yeah. So for that, like, she's like 100% puppet of it, and that's why she's given opportunity. As long as she knows it, she's going to have the future and opportunity, and I'm sure she's going to do her own best. In the meantime, like the policy wise, I believe that there's a discussion now that Mr. Abe is going to come back in an official role in the near future, and potentially if the Takaichi wins to become prime minister, there's discussion Mr. Abe is going to become Secretary General after Nikai, right? Yeah. So for that, whether she may become one or the Motegi may become one, then again, whoever in a policy will be driven by Mr. Abe and his team, and through the Secretary General of LDP going forward, right, after the September 30th. So that's my view as far as I know. All right, thank you. I'm done talking.
Thank you very much, Hayato. I think, Mr. Abe, you're not going to see him in the limelight until the cloud of suspicion with the public prosecutor is removed. I think probably his best move is taking over the Hosoda faction and inserting in the Secretary General's position somebody of his choosing. And if he has also achieved the prime ministership with his candidate, that puts him in a really pretty position. But it just strikes me, the person that you would think he would dedicate his endorsement on is a fellow who is already in his faction, who's been there, who's gotten all of the he satisfies all the criteria to become prime minister, Mr. Shimomura, but he doesn't receive that endorsement. So maybe maybe there's something in store for Shimomura because he deserves something, but maybe he's just not the kind of person that could generate a winning LDP election. So I think that's what they're looking for. They're looking for somebody that's going to spark this interest and this view that the LDP is on our side and it's going to take us into the future and distance us from COVID and that sort of thing. So you're right. He can withdraw it at any time. It could be just a trial balloon. We've seen that before.
Yeah, and he kind of, I believe that he kind of select the, the Takaichi over Motegi because, the Takaichi is a woman. So it's a kind of popular choice at this time.
Yeah, I think so. She is also very strongly associated with Nippon Kaigi. So that could weigh in her favor in certain quarters, but it could weigh against her in other quarters. So a lot of that will be revealed and run up the flagpole by the press and by detractors. So, for example, you might have noticed that this power harassment claim against Konotaro surfaced more prominently this last week to kind of pull him down. He was at in the 20% in appreciation and admiration, and then he's fallen to like 16% now. So something is behind that, to kind of clip his wings. The fact that his manifesto did not receive a whole lot of publicity, the fact that he didn't really play much of a role this last week when Koizumi was playing a role and there was a lot of jostling. So yeah, a lot of trial balloons, a lot of, testing the waters. This next week will be absolutely chocker full of that.
Yeah, so the Nihon Kaigi means that the Takaichi's right wing who want to increase the military budget to fight against China. That's what it means, right?
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah, it means that, and it means a lot more. I mean, Nippon Kaigi stands for a lot more than that, but that's one of the things that it is most well known for. But it is it's a huge group.
Yeah, so she's like on a Stevens camp here.
What's that? Stevens Camp?
Yeah, on geopolitics, she'll be the big player.
What does it mean, Stevens Camp?
Oh, so I kind of sense also, that in this days, there's whoever that's going to lead Japan is going to be very friendly with the U.S. policy for the Japan to wanted to militarize Japan stronger by increase defense budget and arm up better.
Well,
So
I'm
that's kind of
sorry,
my sense.
Hayato. I didn't understand. When you said Stevens Camp, were you talking about Dr. Nagy, or is there
Yeah,
some other
Dr.
reference?
Nagy, right. That's right. Yeah, because he
Okay.
talks about geopolitics. So that
Okay.
Takaichi is more in,
Yeah.
how his player, his camp.
One of the things, maybe other people have something to say about this too, but I just had to laugh. Finally, Rahm Emanuel received the official endorsement of Mr. Biden, and it was announced, although we've talked about it here on this room, it was announced publicly on Monday, the day after our last meeting, that Rahm Emanuel is now the candidate for a consideration in the Senate as the next ambassador to Japan, and he has Biden's ear. And it's just it's funny because too bad for him, the timing is all off. It doesn't look like. I mean, even if the President Biden remains as president, he's something of a lame duck given the public opinion polls and just the amount of energy that's directed against him. That even if the ambassador to Japan has his ear, it probably doesn't mean that much. And it's just such a rich and delicious meal to talk about the geopolitics, the relationship between Japan and the United States, what's going on in the United States, in the White House, and in the State Department, geopolitically, and also what's going on in Japan. It's just wow, what a interesting time to be living, and what an unbelievable position geographically to be in. as the whole world is really beginning to change in front of our eyes. And this change, we've talked about this before, this change, the pace of change these days is so much more accelerated than it was in the recent past. I mean, in 10 or 15, even 5 years ago, change occurs so briskly now that you really have to be on top of things because the acceleration of change is so astounding.
Yeah, yesterday, the aircraft carrier, UK aircraft carrier Queen Elizabeth, came to Yokosuka base, So there are a lot of things happening around here.
There is maybe in Stephen's room we should spend a little bit of time talking about the defense and the alignment of forces. There was a discussion about the British establishing a naval base here in Japan, and you hear that. I don't know how valid that news story is. I'm going to be chasing it down. But the fact that many other countries are considering, the positioning of forces here, it's not just the United States, it's just not the Americans in Okinawa and Iwakuni and, providing this nuclear umbrella, but other countries are also getting actively engaged too. It's, wow, that's something really to consider and something that should be watched.
It sounds like a Japanese economy is going to turn around with this industrial complex coming here.
Yes. And I think it's indicative as well because the British ambassador in Japan is giving a reception on the occasion of the carrier visiting Japan. So it's really interesting because in the past, it seems that there weren't such events, basically being so open to welcoming, let's say, military carriers to Japan because things were more subtle and people basically, diplomats basically refrained from being so open. But I wonder what Stephen's take on this.
Yeah.
Well, I think that I'm on, right? So the first comment I wanted to make was that from, I think, foreign countries' points of view, the last thing they want to see is rotating prime ministership of Japan. They experienced the former prime minister, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And one thing that they really appreciated was the steady leadership he had in terms of foreign affairs, in terms of promoting the TPP-11 or the Japan-EU infrastructure and investment, infrastructure and connectivity arrangements, as well as a whole bunch of other multilateral agreements. And what I think the United States or whoever is interested in is a consistent leadership, a long-term leadership. And whoever is going to be the next prime minister, whether it's Takaichi or Konotaro or whoever, they want to see that leader around. They want to see them to be a good communicator. They want to see them to be out and about, really being a support mechanism for a broader partnership within the Indo-Pacific region. I can't tell you how much I hear that from different governments in this region, is they want to see Japan be successful, have the same leader for a long time. With regards to the visits of the UK or other countries to Japan and bringing their aircraft carrier groups, this is something that is the broader trend. Japan realizes that the US-Japan alliance is not the only game in town, that it needs to strengthen other partnerships. And the new Prime Minister will continue this because it's primarily driven through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Defense. The Kante has shapes the contour somewhat, but it's more driven through the bureaucracy. But you've seen the kind of the general direction of Japanese security policy moving forward. For example, in 2020, in October, Australia and Japan signed what's called the Reciprocal Access Agreement, so that Japan can go and train in Australia and vice versa. There's a similar, not as significant agreement with Canada and the UK as well. So rather than building bases in Japan, there's going to be access agreements, which allows for those forces to spend more of their time in this region. And I think that's the general trend, whoever will be prime minister, is that Japan is weaving itself into a whole bunch of different security partnerships because it understands that, the U.S.-Japan partnership is really important, but Japan needs to do more on its own to deal with some of the security challenges within the region. And I don't articulate this in terms of militarization at all. I articulate it in terms of defense. Until the Constitution changes significantly, I think that we shouldn't expect Japan sending troops on the ground anywhere. Legally, they can't do it, and it creates huge challenges. And even with the evacuation of Japanese nationals in Afghanistan, we saw how the Constitution limits an effective response to a crisis event. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Steve.
Just a quick question, if I may, to Timothy.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so Timothy, maybe you covered this already, but I would like you to, if possible, I would like you to get a little bit deeper into this. But how true is it that Aso may join Abe to support Takeichi instead of his boy, Kono?
That's a great question, and the answer is a bit opaque because although Abe made the announcement, Aso didn't join him, and it doesn't make sense for them to be fighting to promote different candidates. I think what's going on in the background is it's not just the prime minister's position, it's also the LDP key positions, as the kind of dictatorship of Nikai has revealed, that whoever's going to be in charge wants to have those critical levers also covered. And since Mr. Nikai has already announced that he's going to be giving up that seat, he'll be going someplace else, but it will probably be a lateral or maybe a higher move, maybe vice president of the LDP. But he's still a powerful contender, even though he's 82 years old. I think there's some kind of disease that happens to people like that, not just politicians, but also people in various positions in chambers of commerce or within companies, that you just get it's not an addiction. It's part of your persona. This is what you do. This is how you perceive yourself, that they just can't give it up. And they just stick with it, even though people are telling them that they should move on, and they're causing more damage than producing value. But from their own perspective, they're helping themselves. So the whole thing, I believe, will shift, and I think probably it's in Aso's. You don't want to have a ship fight between Aso and Abe. You want to make sure that you've got the prime minister's position and a couple of key positions, and maybe give up the ministerial portfolios, which are also prized possessions, to people who have been dedicating themselves to your faction. But a lot will be, dictated by that. I'm very curious about Aso too. Kono Taro didn't say that he got the boss's endorsement. He says, I'm talking to people now. I intend to, he didn't say I intend to run. He said, I intend to follow their advice, but definitely he wants to have those 20 signatures. If Aso is behind him, he'll get them. But the fact that Aso hasn't said anything would make me a little bit nervous if I was in his position.
Yeah, some of the Japanese media actually went a little bit even stronger prediction of the Aso definitely going to support Takaichi. So if Aso supports Takaichi, it seems like a little bit of a game over for Kono Taro, I would think, or would that not be?
No, I think, as Hayato mentioned, it's never game over for these guys. These are all old salty horses, and probably the play for Aso Taro would be an LDP position because he's never had that. And as Stephen pointed out, part of the demerit of a Kono candidacy is that he's got certain pockets that like him, but he's got a lot of pockets, important pockets, that don't like him because they don't know him, that he's never done favors for them. He's somewhat isolated from their world. So he's not going away. You can bet your dollar that at some point in time he will become prime minister, as will Koizumi. It's just a matter of time. I don't know if you disagree with me, but I think that's the general consensus.
Yeah, thank you. When I meant game over, I didn't mean the political career. I meant for this election as a prime minister.
Yeah. And I think that's why you don't see Konotaro really, putting down the hammer that I want to do it. This is what I want to do. He is being a little bit reserved, maybe just to preserve his face. That if he doesn't get that, he's playing the rules. He's playing what whoever is his handler wants him to do, and so it preserves his position for maybe not leapfrogging, and maybe becoming prime minister would be a leapfrog for him.
I see. Thank you.
Maybe the better idea is, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Maya, may I ask just one more question to Timothy?
Of course, please go.
Thank you. Timothy, as usual, the Japanese media don't talk too much about the why, but only what, right? They mentioned that the reason Abe-san supported Takaichi is because Seiji Shinjo, which I guess means political beliefs, are similar. But what are the similarities? I couldn't find any media talking about it. Can you shed some light on that?
Well, no, I think as we talk on this room a lot, Japanese politics is not so much dictated by, policy and political leanings. It's personality driven. So not a lot of people. Pardon me?
So I guess the Japanese media is talking about Abe supporting Takaichi is because of political beliefs similarities is really just not true. More of a personality similarities than political beliefs similarities. Is your point, I guess, right?
Part of it, but it could be that Mr. Abe is also a member of Nippon Kaigi, and maybe within that group they have come to their own consensus that is not being reported. It's not being revealed or discussed. But maybe that membership and that devotion to the vision of Nippon Kaigi, maybe it's not shared as much by Konotaro. I think that's a likely scenario. So maybe that's part of the distinction. So it's not accurate to say that it's all personality driven.
Yeah.
It heavily is, but at a critical juncture like this, it could be that we're dividing hairs and making sure that the best outcome is the one that benefits us the best.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Timothy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ren.
Oh, hi, can I add?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
So this Takaichi and Abe, it's like I mentioned to you earlier, the Abe is a master and Takaichi is a disciple, right? So their belief or any action will be the same, right? So for that, that's why Takaichi has an opportunity. Now it's not like we discuss on the policies or anything like that. Takaichi is given a policy, pretty much, right? Yeah, so that's how it works. Even the book that she's going to publish tomorrow, the book is written by the Abe camp, where the Takaichi is author. Yeah, so for that, so it's pretty much like she's like like I mentioned to you, she's a bunshin, right? Like she's like a front or the mini Abe, right? Yeah, so that's who she is going to be. Are they starting as a prime minister? Let's hope that she's going to develop her own in the future, right? But that's otherwise she won't get any opportunity at this time. Thank you. I'm done talking.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight. The other interesting insight that we haven't talked about at all is what happens to Suga after he becomes prime minister. So typically in Japanese politics, as prime minister, you're under a magnifying glass. People are watching you. They're kind of criticizing you. They're trying to draw inferences from whatever it is that you say or do. And your power really enhances after you have been prime minister. That typically happens, not with everybody, but it typically happens. So the question is, what happens with Mr. Suga once he gives up the ship? He's still going to be a member of the parliament. He's still going to have a lot of debts that are owed to him after having been prime minister. He's not just going to disappear. It remains open. He does look absolutely exhausted, though. I think it'd probably it'd be a good idea to take a couple of weeks off and get out of town. But then again, he hasn't been known to be very charismatic or dynamic, especially on the foreign front. But he is a force that we just need to keep an eye on, because it's kind of it's there. It's not going to disappear, and he probably has some scores to settle, obviously.
Thank you to everybody who joined us today. I hope that we have answered some of your questions. As the next weeks will be fascinating, join us again next Saturday at 8:30 here on Clubhouse to follow the coming turns in the road on the way to the accession of the next leadership of LDP in Japan. Also, tomorrow we'll launch our new series on geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific and Japan's role in it, with Dr. Stephen Nagy. The room opens at 8 p.m. Japanese time on Monday, September 6th. If you have an hour, join us there. Now we wish you a great day and see you next week.